Angel Reese says WNBA players could go on strike over salary and benefits.
Patrick Bet David just called out Angel Reese on camera, and it wasn't even a contest. Caitlyn Clark was sitting at the NBC desk, cool and collected, telling the entire country the 2026 season is happening. No drama, no threats, just confidence. Angel Reese, she was on a live stream, floating the idea of sitting out like she personally built everything this league stands on.
Angel Reese, now also a household name. And so you had this wonderful culmination of incredibly talented young women that were also marketable.
Bet David said what every fan was already thinking. He named names, he dropped numbers, and he asked one question that cut straight through all the noise, a question Angel Reese still hasn't answered. The truth behind this moment runs deeper than anyone is saying. Stay with us, we reveal it all. The shot that landed. Patrick Bet David is not your average sports commentator. He doesn't need a press pass. He doesn't need locker room access. He built his name by saying things straight, no softening, no corporate language, out of no protecting relationships with league insiders. So when he went on camera and said that every single WNBA player better pray Caitlyn Clark doesn't get injured because she is the one keeping the entire league afloat, that hit differently than your usual sports media take. He wasn't reading off a teleprompter. He wasn't carefully navigating around someone's feelings. He looked at the camera and said what he actually believed, and Angel Reese's name came up directly. Bet David pointed at the moment Reese went on a live stream and casually floated the idea of sitting out the 2026 season like it was some kind of negotiating weapon she'd earned the right to use. He basically broke it down to one clean point. You don't get to threaten to walk away from something you didn't build. That framing hit a nerve because it was simple and it was honest. Now here's the thing about Bet David's platform. He runs PBD Podcasts.
I asked my friend, Patrick Bet David, host of the PBD podcast, to come on tonight.
And then one of the biggest business and current events shows on YouTube. Millions of subscribers. An audience that respects straight talk over polished PR responses. When he speaks, it's not to a niche sports crowd. It's to a massive general audience that includes investors, entrepreneurs, and casual fans who follow culture more than box scores. That's a different kind of reach. That's a different kind of damage. Sports media have insiders who need credentials. They need access to locker rooms, coaches, and front offices. That access comes with an unspoken agreement: don't burn bridges, don't say things that get your press pass pulled. So certain conversations never happen on ESPN. Certain names never get called out directly. There's always a careful balance between honesty and access. Bet David operates with zero of those constraints, no credential to protect, no relationship with the league to preserve, no agent calling after the show asking him to soften his language. He says what he sees, and his audience trusts him specifically because of that. Fans weren't pushing back in the comments. They weren't debating. They were agreeing loudly and specifically. The reaction wasn't manufactured. It was months of built-up frustration, finally finding a voice that was big enough to be heard. Bet David didn't create that frustration. He just gave it a shape that people could point to. And once he said it, there was no putting it back in the box. Here's what made the whole moment stick beyond just one viral clip. Reese went on that live stream looking completely relaxed. No urgency, no desperation. Just a casual conversation where sitting out an entire professional season came up like it was a minor inconvenience, not a decision that affects teammates, younger players watching, and fans who actually pay for tickets. That casual tone is what people couldn't get past. It wasn't the threat itself. It was how unbothered she seemed making it. The reason his words landed so hard wasn't because of who he was attacking. It was because of who he was defending and what the numbers actually showed about why that defense made complete sense. Clark's numbers don't lie. Before Caitlyn Clark stepped into the WNBA,
NCAA superstar Caitlyn Clark is ready to take her game to the next level as a WNBA rookie.
The league was averaging somewhere around 6,000 fans per game. That wasn't a crisis moment. That was just the normal state of things. Consistent, quiet, and largely ignored by mainstream sports media. Then Clark showed up. In a single year from 2023 to 2024, attendance across the entire league jumped 48%. Not just in Indiana, Not just at Fever home games. Across the whole league, 48% in 1 year is not a coincidence. That does not happen because of a marketing campaign or a new jersey design. That happens because of one player whom people genuinely wanted to watch. Merchandise sales from 2023 to 2024 went up 601%. Read that number again, 601%. ESPN was averaging 1.2 million viewers per game. For Clark's games, a 170% increase over what those slots were pulling before. The All-Star Game crossed 4 million viewers. Now put those numbers in context. The NBA, the most powerful basketball league on the planet, averages roughly 18,000 fans per arena per game. For decades, the WNBA sat at a fraction of that. Nobody in mainstream sports media was writing big features about it. Nobody in the sponsor world was rushing to attach their brand to it. It existed, it survived, but it wasn't growing in any way that made business people excited. Clark changed that math in 12 months, and here is the part that gets overlooked in most conversations. The spike wasn't just in ticket sales or TV ratings. It was in the type of attention the league started receiving. Casual sports fans, people who had never watched a WNBA game in their lives, started tuning in.
Over 55,000 fans were part of the largest crowd ever to watch a women's basketball game. And somehow from there, the legend of Caitlyn only grew.
The sports business journalists started writing about the league as a genuine growth opportunity. Brands that had zero previous interest in women's basketball started calling. That is a different category of impact. Attendance going up is good. Changing who is paying attention to your league entirely, that is transformational. These are not soft numbers. These are not things are trending in the right direction numbers. These are numbers that change what a league is worth. When networks look at these numbers and write bigger checks, sponsors see these numbers and sign longer deals. Ownership groups see these numbers and start thinking about expansion. The WNBA added 2 new teams. More are coming. The league went from a conversation nobody was having to a product that sports business people were genuinely excited about. None of that happened slowly over time. It happened in 1 season, Clark's first season. Clark also came in as a rookie, at the lowest paid position in any professional sports structure. She was earning a rookie contract while simultaneously generating numbers that most established sports properties would spend years trying to manufacture. The financial gap between what she was being paid and what she was actually producing for the league was enormous, and she never made it a public issue. She just played. So when Bette David said she's keeping the league afloat, that wasn't an opinion dressed up as a fact. Actually, we're going up, and the league was getting more attention than it had seen in decades. Some of the veteran players who benefited most from that growth were making life harder for the person responsible for it. That part of the story matters because it's connected to everything that came after. 2 seasons of pushback. From the moment Clark walked into her first professional training camp, the treatment she received from veteran players
It was a good first day. It was hard, but that's what you expect from these practices.
was something fans noticed and didn't forget. There was physical play that went beyond normal basketball. There were comments about earning respect, as if setting every meaningful scoring record in college basketball history and selling out arenas on her first road trip as a professional wasn't enough to earn anything. And then something even more specific happened. Veterans started criticizing Clark's new fans, the people who showed up because of her. Paying customers who bought tickets, tuned in, and started following the league veterans told them they didn't know enough about WNBA history, that they hadn't paid their dues. Think about that for a second. Here is what that actually looked like in practice. Clark's games were selling out venues that had never sold out before. Road trips that previously drew a few thousand people were suddenly drawing capacity crowds. Fans were showing up in Clark jerseys, learning player names for the first time, downloading the WNBA app, buying league pass subscriptions. These were not people looking to disrespect the league's history. These were people who found a door in, and that door was Clark. And some veterans responded by telling those fans the door wasn't really open for them. That is one of the most self-defeating moves a struggling league can make. You don't get to spend years asking for more attention, more fans, more investment, and then turn around and police who those fans are when they finally show up. That is not how building an audience works. That is how you lose one. The league had been averaging 6,000 fans a game. New fans showed up, and the response from some veterans was to make those fans feel unwelcome. Off the court, the pattern continued. Social media posts, interviews, comments that consistently framed Clark's presence as something to be managed rather than celebrated. The message coming from certain corners of the locker room was clear: Clark needed to earn her place, even while she was actively filling seats that had been empty for years.
Caitlyn Clark spent most of 2024 as possibly the most famous sports personality in the entire country.
No rookie in any professional sport is asked to earn their place while simultaneously carrying the financial weight of their entire league. That standard was applied to Clark and nobody else. The fans who were told they didn't belong, they're still here, and they kept receipts. Every player who took a shot at Clark during her first 2 seasons on the court or off it is now posting about the CBA negotiations and getting buried in the replies. The internet has a long memory, and right now it is not being quiet about what it remembers. Those same fans who got lectured about not knowing enough WNBA history are now the ones funding the leverage the union is trying to use. Their ticket purchases, their streaming subscriptions, their merchandise spending, their eyeballs on ESPN. That money is real, that growth is documented, and those fans know exactly where it came from. Bet David tapped into this exact frustration. Not just the salary argument, not just the negotiation tactics, the specific documented history of veteran players doing everything possible to make Clark's entry into the league uncomfortable and then turning around and using Clark's success as leverage in a labor fight. That is the part that made people genuinely angry, not frustrated, angry. And Angel Reese was the most visible face of that pattern, which is exactly why Bet David used her name. The live stream mistake. Angel Reese has been open about her finances. She said publicly that her WNBA salary, $74,000 a year, doesn't cover her bills. She said on Instagram Live that the league doesn't pay even one of her bills. That part is understandable.
On ongoing Instagram Live, basketball star Angel Reese says her WNBA salary does not cover her rent.
The salary numbers in the WNBA are genuinely low for professional athletes at her level. That's a real problem worth talking about. But then came the live stream moment that changed the conversation entirely. Reese was on camera, relaxed, casual, and she floated the idea of sitting out the 2026 season. It's not as a last resort, not as a desperate measure, as a chip, as something she could put on the table because she felt like she had the leverage to use it. The problem wasn't that she talked about the CBA. Players have every right to advocate for better pay. The problem was the framing. The way she talked about sitting out like it was a power move she'd earned landed wrong with fans who had watched 2 full years of context leading up to that moment. Because the leverage she was waving around, it didn't come from her. It came from Clark. The attendance records, the TV money, the sponsorship deals, the network executives who are now paying attention to women's basketball in a way they weren't 2 years ago. That's not Reese's work. That is Clark's fingerprints on every single number. And on the same day Reese was on a live stream talking about sitting out, Clark was on the NBC desk, calm, professional, telling the country she expects a deal to get done. No drama, no threats. We're no ultimatums. She said, "We're in this moment because of the product we put on the floor." That's it. That was her entire statement on the CBA. Clean, confident, and forward-looking. The contrast between those 2 moments happening on the same day was impossible to miss. Fans saw it, sponsors saw it, network executives saw it. One player was protecting the league's image, one player was threatening it, and everyone knew which was which. The truth behind the negotiations. Here is where the story gets genuinely complicated and genuinely frustrating. After a key in-person bargaining session between WNBA ownership and the Players Association, the union went public with a very specific story. Nika Umike, the WNBPA president, told Front Office Sports that the league came to that meeting.
President of the WNBA Players Association, she negotiated a new collective bargaining agreement
without a proposal ready. Her exact message to the public was simple. The owners showed up empty-handed. Nothing on the table. Now, to slap in the face to players who were ready to negotiate seriously. That story spread fast because it fit a narrative people were ready to believe. Ownership dragging its feet, the league not taking its players seriously, the little guy getting ignored by people with money. Then the actual numbers came out. The league had proposed a salary cap of around $5 million in year one, individual max salaries climbing toward $1.3 million, with potential to reach $2.4 million by 2031, expanded benefits. With new player protections, real numbers attached to a real written proposal that was sitting in the room during that meeting. The union told the public there was nothing on the table. There was very clearly something on the table. That is not spin. That is not a negotiating tactic. That is lying to the fans who were fully prepared to go to bat for the players, and it cost the union everything when the real numbers leaked. But it gets worse. Two of the Players Association's own executive committee members, Kelsey Plum and Nafisa Collier, didn't even show up to that meeting in person. The owners flew in. They sat down at the table. They brought a written proposal. And two of the people who are supposed to be leading the fight for players dialed in on Zoom. Travel issues, apparently, for the single most important labor meeting in this league's history. And then, was it the union went public and said the owners weren't serious? The side that didn't show up in person was the one telling the world the other side wasn't committed. Fans who were ready to support the players started doing the math when the real numbers came out. You cannot build a sympathy campaign on a story that falls apart the second anyone checks the facts. The public trust the union needed most, the fans who were emotionally invested and ready to advocate that trust, evaporated fast. And then there is the conflict of interest that nobody in mainstream sports media wanted to talk about directly. Nafisa Collier and Breanna Stewart are not just WNBA players. They co-founded Unrivaled, a 3-on-3 league that runs during the WNBA offseason. The entire business model of Unrivaled depends on WNBA players needing additional income.
That the NBA is getting, they could move some of that money to the WNBA to invest.
Now, if WNBA salaries rise high enough that players are financially comfortable, the reason to spend the offseason playing in a competing league disappears. A richer WNBA is genuinely bad for Unrivaled's bottom line. Collier and Stewart have a direct financial reason to want WNBA salaries to stay manageable. And these are the same two people who are supposed to be fighting hardest for every player's salary to go up. Collier didn't show up in person to the biggest meeting of the negotiations. Collier went on a broadcast during an Unrivaled game and talked about what they're building over there. And Collier is on the executive committee that's supposed to have every WNBA player's best interest at the center of every decision. Sophie Cunningham said on a podcast that she sees the conflict of interest clearly. She named it directly. She asked out loud what other players are supposed to do when the people leading their union may have reasons of their own to let these talks fall apart. Naka, that is not a small thing. The players getting hurt most by this negotiation falling apart aren't Collier and Stewart. They're players like Aaliyah Boston, Lexi Hall, Kelsey Mitchell, players who want to play basketball in 2026, players whose careers are being held hostage by a leadership group with financial interests that point in the opposite direction from the players they represent. Honor, here is what this whole situation comes down to. The WNBA has been losing around $40 million a year since 1997. It has never been financially comfortable. It has survived on hope, loyalty, and the occasional player who was big enough to move the needle. Clark moved the needle harder than anyone in this league's history, in one season, with real numbers attached. And right now, the people in charge of protecting players are making decisions that could blow up the one moment this league has ever had to build something lasting. Clark didn't threaten anyone. She showed up to an NBC desk and told the country the 2026 season is happening. That one moment did more for this league's future than every union press release combined. If you want to know which side of this fight actually has the league's best interest at heart, the answer's right there on the NBC desk, like this video. And turn on notifications because this story is not done yet.